Hey, I'm Mike.
And I'm Lisa, and I'm really excited to be spending time with you in this new series focusing on God's big promise. So Mike, what's the best promise you ever received?
Well, when I was in high school, my parents promised me that if I got into university, they would get me a car.
Oh, nice.
Which I was super pumped about. So you can imagine actually going to get the car, knowing the freedom I was going to have, driving myself around, was so excited about that.
That's a great promise, and that ties into today's big idea that Jesus is God's greatest promise. So let's check out today's God story to learn more.
Could you imagine what he was feeling holding Jesus in his arms at a... Hi everyone, it's Jen. I'm so excited to be with you today. Have you ever had to wait a really long time for something, maybe for dinner or a trip you're gonna go on? Speaking of trips, I love to go on vacation at a certain hotel every year. But in order to get this particular hotel, I have to book it 11 months in advance. So it's really exciting when you're planning and you book it, but then I have to wait more than 300 days to go on vacation, and that seems like a pretty long time. Sometimes we wait and wait and wait for something that isn't even that great. We might have to wait at the dentist's office, at the doctor's, in the grocery store line. We just have to wait. Well, in today's God story, we're going to hear about a promise that God made to his people, and they had to wait hundreds and hundreds of years. But this promise was worth the wait. This promise was Jesus. And that leads me to today's big idea. Jesus is God's greatest promise. Today, we're going to dive into a God story just a few days after Jesus' birth. He was only a few days old. This story is about Jesus, an older man named Simeon, and an older woman named Anna. In Jerusalem, Mary and Joseph went to the temple with their baby Jesus. When they were there, well, let's just read it. There, in Jerusalem at the temple, they presented him to the Lord. In the law of the Lord, it says, "The first boy born in every family must be set apart for the Lord." This is a law that God gave to Moses in the book of Exodus. They also offered a sacrifice. They did it in keeping with the law, which says a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons. Now this is a law that God gave to Moses in the book of Leviticus. So Mary and Joseph obeyed the rules that God gave to the Hebrew people, but I'm sure they didn't expect what happened next. In Jerusalem, there was a man named Simeon. He was a good and godly man. He was waiting for God's promise to Israel to come true. You see, God had been promising a rescue, a savior to his people for hundreds of years. Really, since Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, God was promising a rescuer that would save people from their sin and reconnect them with God. That story was all the way back in Genesis 3, and today's story is in Luke chapter 2. Can you imagine how much happened between those two stories? Now, that's not the only time that God promised Jesus in the Old Testament. Scattered throughout the Old Testament, God promises his people a rescuer. Prophets share of a coming savior, someone who will rescue the Israelite people, someone who will set them free. The people have been waiting for so long. And then Jesus is born. But there are only a few people who know that he is the one that God has promised. And that's where Simeon comes in. Let's read. The Spirit had told Simeon that he would not die before he had seen the Lord's Messiah. The Spirit led him into the temple courtyard. Then Jesus' parents brought the child in. They came to do for him what the law required. Simeon took Jesus in his arms and praised God. He said, "Lord, you are the king over all. Now let me, your servant, go in peace. That is what you promised. My eyes have seen your salvation. You have prepared it in the sight of all nations. It is a light to be given to the Gentiles. It will be the glory of your people Israel." How cool is that? Before other people knew that Jesus was the Savior, Simeon knew. Could you imagine what he was feeling, holding Jesus in his arms as a baby and knowing? That would be an amazing experience. If that wasn't cool enough, there was another person, a prophet named Anna, who came up to them. After Anna got married, she was only married for 7 years before her husband died. When Anna's husband passed away, she spent day and night at the temple worshiping God, praying and fasting. Let's see what happens next. Anna came up to Jesus' family at that moment. She gave thanks to God, and she spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the time when Jerusalem would be set free. Joseph and Mary did everything the law of the Lord required. Then they returned to Galilee. They went to their own town of Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong. He was very wise. He was blessed by God's grace. Anna also knew something was special about Jesus. She knew that he was the one they were waiting for. She knew that he was the promised one of God. Mary and Joseph must have been overwhelmed by this. Could you imagine being the parents of God's greatest promise? As Jesus followers, we know that Jesus came to show us God's love and to save us from sin. We know what happened with Jesus as he grew up, began his ministry, and then died and rose again. We also know that Jesus is God's son. But the Israelite or Jewish people didn't have the whole story like we do today. They only had little hints and pieces of it. So for Simeon and Anna to have the clarity that Jesus was the promise that the people had been waiting for hundreds of years, this is amazing stuff. Jesus was definitely a promise worth waiting for. Jesus is God's greatest promise. Well, friends, it was so great to be with you. I will see you next time.
All right, now quickly turn to the person next to you and answer the following question.
Question time! Mary and Joseph took baby Jesus to the temple when he was 1 year old, 6 months old, 8 days old, or sick. 8 days old. There was a man at the temple named Simeon, and he was waiting for a bus, God's promise to come true, a sign, or God to make it rain. God's promise to come true. There was also an old woman at the temple named Anna. She knew the future, Mary's mother, or that Jesus was the promised rescuer. That Jesus was the promised rescuer.
Game time! Liftoff! How many times can you say the key verse before the rocket lands on the moon? Say it with me. We have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God. John 6, verse 69. Get ready! 3, 2, 1, go!
And they say the longer you have to wait for something, the more you appreciate it when it finally does come.
Let's check out Natalie's story and find out what promise she's been waiting for.
I love theater because there's so much magic everywhere. Sitting in the audience, you can be transported to another land, you can become another person. There's so much magic in theater. My name's Natalie. I love to rock climb, I love to see musicals, and I love baking. I was acting in some shows. I had been in 2 or 3 shows and kind of realized that it was not my strong suit. It's not where my forte was. I realized that I had some strong leadership skills and that my skills might be more suited backstage. So I volunteered with a youth program backstage, working on the tech and being an assistant stage manager, and I fell in love with that role. I decided to apply to Sheridan for their technical production program, and during my first year I didn't really feel like I belonged. I wasn't sure if I was good enough to be there. I wasn't sure that I fit. Once I started school, I realized that the course load was way more than I had anticipated. I had to work really, really hard to keep up. I was dealing with all of those things on top of anxiety, on top of having Crohn's disease, and all of that together made kind of a firestorm for me. Sheridan has a lot of really, really amazing stuff that we get to do with our program. One of my favorite classes was wardrobe. We got to create lots of garments. We got to work on the shows as a dressers, helping the actors get ready for their show. I love that class because you can do insane, crazy things. I've always wanted to work on character pieces with period costumes and things like that. There's so much to do in wardrobe. So every year at Sheridan, we produce 6 musicals a year. We do 3 in our big theater and 3 in our small one. So I found out that I would be stage managing our main stage show, Shrek the Musical. It's a huge job, and I felt really, really validated. I felt like this was God saying, all of this hard work, all of the struggle that you've gone through, this is why you have done it. This is what you are here for. Being a stage manager, you have to know everything about everything that's going on in a show. I need to know how all of the set pieces go together. I need to make sure that they're safe so my cast won't be getting hurt. I need to know how they work. So I get a chance to visit with the carpenters, see what they have been working on, see each of the set pieces, and go through and speak with them about any of their concerns, any of their safety issues, and kind of just see how things are going along to make sure it's going the way that it's supposed to be going. Stage managing can be a really, really stressful job. It's a huge undertaking. There's so much involved. Dealing with anxiety in a stage management capacity is really difficult sometimes because you are the person who needs to know all of the answers. I find that when I am putting on my stage manager hat, my anxiety goes away. I am able to focus just on what needs to be done and kind of work through any small anxieties that come up. I feel like, I don't know, this year there's been so many good things about this year. I have felt so comfortable. I felt so much like I belong. And I really feel like God has said, you trusted me. I promised that I would take care of you. I promised that I have your best interest at heart. And I was able to stick with that. And it's turned out to be more amazing than I could have ever imagined.
I'm so happy for Natalie. It's so great that God showed her where she was supposed to be was the right place, and what's even better is that he showed it to her in a way that she really appreciated.
Yeah, and even though it took some time and some hardships, God did deliver on his promise, and now she can see how good it was.
Yeah, and what I take away from that is that when we're wondering about our circumstances, we can just ask God for his assurance, and then when he shows us his promise, we can just run with it.
Yeah, so now why don't we get into our small groups and talk about what this looks like in our own lives.